report about the Latin Mass that evidently was leaked recently. And it's based on a survey that evidently went out when Pope Francis was the Pope. And he was putting his feelers out trying to see, how much support there was for the Latin Mass and feedback from the bishops of the world and what they thought about it. And the way it was presented right before Traditionis Custodes that restricted access to it, the way it was presented was that many of the bishops had concerns about the Latin Mass and wanted to see it restricted. But evidently this report is supposed to maybe challenge that perspective and indicate that many bishops were supportive of it. Now, I've seen people
supportive of having the Latin Mass, keeping the traditional.
Yeah. Now, I've seen some people challenge that back and forth, but I think the common impression that most people have right now, at least on the online discourse, is that somehow, the basis for Traditionis Custodes was wrong. It was, basically Pope Francis, what he said wasn't true. That the bishops weren't supportive of it. And so some people are even starting to question, well, did he just lie so that he can get his way and restrict the Latin Mass and stuff like that? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
First of all, the Pope doesn't have to lie to be able to do whatever he wants with the liturgy, right? The Pope has the authority to, just like the Pope has the authority to do what he wants with the liturgy. We want a pope who's going to stay faithful to the needs of the church, and that's where it's a little bit opaque about what happened and what we understand happened. I find it hard to believe that Pope Francis just flat out is a liar. That's just my guts tell me that that's not true. I do believe that we can sometimes confuse frequency and severity, right? So you can say, for example, hey, I put out a survey, and the response I got for the survey tells me that maybe I should restrict the Latin Mass. For some people, they may be hearing, oh, that must mean all of the bishops support restricting the Latin Mass.
Yeah.
But it could be that a very small minority supported restricting it, but their needs were so grave that the Pope said, listen, I have to listen to this small minority because their needs are so grave and they're asking me to support them in ending the Latin Mass in their diocese. And so they need my help. And so I'm going to have to restrict it for everybody. And that's what I have to do. And so he could be telling the truth, but we could be hearing something different, right? We could be hearing something else completely. So I say that not having any insider information on any of this at all. I know probably less than most people do about all this kind of stuff. But I'm inclined to think that the Pope is not one who tells lies. I'm inclined to think that the Pope was not really a liturgically minded Pope. He certainly took over a decade before he even really got into addressing anything with the liturgy. He was very, very slow to do that kind of stuff. I don't think it was a major concern of his, but I do think bishops, there must have been somebody whose voice kept getting louder and louder and finally got him to act. And however that happened, I have no idea. And neither do you, and neither does anybody else until until someday maybe on the other side of the pearly gates we'll find out all everything that happened. But my impression is I'm not ready to think ill of anybody, based on what I've seen so far. I think that it's a complicated issue. People feel it deep down in their hearts, and many people felt very hurt by this, and it left them with these sore feelings, and they want to know what happened, and that might make some people jump to certain conclusions that we just can't jump to.
Do you think that maybe Pope Leo XIV will reverse some of these restrictions on the Latin Mass and open it up a little bit more? Or
I'm not sure. Pope Leo appears to think about the liturgy more than Pope Francis. Some people saw Pope Francis as sort of like almost an iconoclast. I don't think he was. I think he was a more simple guy. I think he didn't love the outward expressions of the liturgy as something on the front of his mind all the time. Pope Leo seems to be just a notch or two more in that direction. Someone like a Benedict XVI who cared a lot more about the liturgy and its different forms and what it looked like. It seems like Leo is just leaning a little bit more in that direction. I don't think that he will just reverse. I've heard you say it before, the reversal of the reversal of the reversal of the reversal, right? I don't think he will do that. I think he is probably more likely to try to see if he can let sleeping dogs lie for as long as he can. And then if he has to address it, my guess would be that he would do do it through example of encouraging people to just, I hear a lot of people who go into and who support the traditional Latin Mass in such a way where they take the Novus Ordo and basically say there's no such thing as a good Novus Ordo. Mm-hmm. They may say that it's valid. They may say that it's still, you will still find the true presence in the Eucharist, but that the whole Novus Ordo is just broken from the root. I think that is a very dangerous way to proceed, and certainly it's counterproductive, because what that'll do is that will tell every well-meaning, hard-working, regular Novus Ordo priest who's obedient to his bishop, who is not going to be celebrating the traditional Latin Mass because he doesn't have permission, and you're saying nothing you can do is going to be good enough. So why even try, right? Instead, you say, well, I have these boomer Catholics over here that are going to be happy if I just steady as she goes, and then I have these traditional Catholics that'll never be happy. So I might as well listen and pay attention to the needs and the concerns of the boomer Catholics or whatever. So I think if you're talking about a strategy, if you want to see the church be purified of its many problems with the Novus Ordo, right? With at least the way that it's practiced, you've got to be able to do this prudently and say, how can I be supportive of those Novus Ordo priests who care about tradition, who care about doing the very best that they can, who want to emphasize the good that's found in the Novus Ordo, and who don't want to follow some of the trends that are not really part of the Novus Ordo, but they certainly are trending in the way that the Novus Ordo is practiced, especially in different parts of the world. And I think you want to be supportive of the good priests and the good Novus Ordos that you can still find.
You mentioned there Benedict XVI moments ago, and what was curious to me is that prior to him becoming Pope, he spoke a lot about the Latin Mass, and in some cases spoke critically about the Novus Ordo. But when he became Pope, he never celebrated the Latin Mass. It was always the Novus Ordo. And I always wonder, why didn't he maybe do both? He's the one who gave Summorum Pontificum, opening up access to the Latin Mass a little bit more than under John Paul II and Paul VI. And you would think he would have celebrated it publicly at some point, but he never did. And I'm just always left scratching my head wondering why he didn't do that.
He's remembered as a reform of the reform kind of person, right? And that there are different flavors of what it means to be traditional. And, for some, to be a traditional Catholic means turn back the clock, right? Just try to roll back anything that's happened since 1955, right? And then there are other versions of traditional which say, how do we bring forward, how do we conserve those traditions in the church? And I believe that Benedict XVI believed that the way forward was to reform the reform. So I think, sort of what I was saying before, the best way forward, really, I actually think the only way forward is to reform the reform. To look at the different problems that the Novus Ordo opens things up to, right? So, I mean, when I read Eucharistic Prayer 1, and I read it in Latin, this past week, I celebrated almost every Mass I celebrated was Eucharistic Prayer 1 in Latin, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at those words. There are not a whole lot of differences between that and the traditional Latin Mass in terms of what you're praying for in that anaphora, right? They're very, very, very close. In some cases, it says, the saints of John, in the traditional Latin Mass, John the Baptist, Michael the Archangel, mm-hmm. and instead in the Novus Ordo it says all the angels and saints. I mean, it's those kinds of differences, pretty minor, right? If you when you see it that way, you begin to realize that you begin to look at the liturgy with a hermeneutic of continuity that I believe to be, to conserve those things is the way forward, as opposed to, let's just throw the whole Novus Ordo out. Let's call it a mistake. Let's all say that it's been harmful somehow, even though it's certainly nourished a whole lot of Catholics, yeah. So that's what I think about Benedict XVI. Is I think it was a strategic move of his to try to do the Novus Ordo in a way that remembered and preserved the traditions of the traditional Latin Mass.
Hey, if you enjoyed that video, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and the like button, and also consider supporting me on Patreon, patreon.com/Reason and Theology.